A crowd is climbing a hillside above the Sea of Galilee, and you are climbing with them. The grass is worn thin from thousands of sandals before yours. Fishermen have left their nets on the shore below, still damp, still smelling of the lake. Farmers have left their fields half-plowed. A tax collector trails at the back of the crowd, close enough to listen, far enough to run if he needs to. Men in his profession are not exactly welcome company, and he knows it. And near the front, half hidden among the crowd, are men in fine robes who did not come to be changed. They came to take notes. You do not know their names. History will not record them individually. But you know their type. Scribes and Pharisees, students of the law, men whose entire authority rests on knowing exactly what is permitted and what is forbidden. Their robes are cleaner than most of the crowd around them, their hands softer, unused to nets or plows. They are not here to worship. They are here to listen for a mistake. Somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a mother has brought her children, hoping they will remember this day, even if they cannot yet understand it. A fisherman named Peter, already a follower after only a short time, stands close enough to the front that he can see Jesus' face clearly. And whatever Peter is expecting to hear today, it is almost certainly not what he is about to get. Jesus reaches a shelf of flat ground, and he sits down. That detail matters more than you think. Jewish teachers of the first century usually stood to make announcements and sat to teach with authority. A rabbi seated was a rabbi claiming the right to instruct, the same way a judge sitting on a bench signals that a ruling is about to be made. His disciples gather at his feet. The wider crowd presses in behind them, some straining just to catch the sound of his voice on the wind. And then he opens his mouth, and the words that come out will still be quoted 2,000 years later, on refrigerator magnets and prison walls and deathbeds, by people who have never read another word of the book he is about to explain. We will come back to the men taking notes. Keep them in the back of your mind. Their silence is not empty. It is patient, and it will not stay silent forever. Here's what most people miss about the Sermon on the Mount. It does not open with comfort. It opens with a paradox so strange that if you heard it for the first time today, you might assume you misheard it. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The Greek word behind blessed is makarios, and it is worth pausing on. Makarios does not mean cheerful. It does not mean lucky. It describes a state the pagan world reserved for the gods, a settled, untouchable fullness that circumstances cannot reach. And Jesus takes that word, a word built for the powerful, and hands it to the poor. Picture a widow near the edge of the crowd. She has buried a husband and, likely, at least one child. Infant mortality in this period was brutal, and grief was not a rare visitor in a Galilean village. She owns little. She has no legal standing to speak for herself in court, no husband to advocate on her behalf, no guarantee of her next meal beyond what her neighbors choose to spare. And Jesus looks in her direction, in effect, and says that the kingdom of heaven belongs to people exactly like her. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Not told to stop grieving, but promised that grief will not have the final word. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Not the aggressive, not the loudest voice in the room, but those who hold power without needing to wield it. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. An image every farmer and fisherman in that crowd understood instantly, because hunger was not an abstraction to them. It was Tuesday. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. 9 declarations, not 9 commands. You are not being told to manufacture grief or poverty to earn favor. You are being told that God's favor already rests on the people the world overlooks. And if you have ever felt overlooked, this is where the sermon starts speaking directly to you. But before the sermon moves any further, Jesus turns to the crowd and tells them something about themselves that none of them expected to hear. You are the salt of the earth. Salt in that world was not a garnish. It was a preservative, one of the only ways a family without refrigeration could keep meat and fish from rotting before it reached the table. Every household on that hillside understood exactly what salt was for. Jesus tells this crowd of fishermen, farmers, widows, and tax collectors that they themselves are that preserving agent in the world around them. But he adds a warning. If salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. And there is a detail here worth noticing. Jesus says this while standing, quite literally, on a hill, in view of hillside towns whose lamps would already be visible from a distance once evening fell. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light so shine before others, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Notice what Jesus has not yet told this crowd to do. He has not yet given them a single instruction. He has told them what they already are: salt, light, a city that cannot be hidden, before he asks anything of them at all. Everything that follows in this sermon assumes that identity is already in place. You do not become salt by trying hard enough. You are salt, and the only real question is whether you have lost your flavor. But it gets stranger, because after blessing the broken, Jesus does not lower the moral bar. He raises it higher than any teacher in that crowd has ever raised it. And that is where the scribes in the back start writing faster. 6 times in the next section of the sermon, Jesus repeats a formula. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you. He is quoting the law of Moses. Scripture his listeners had memorized since childhood, recited in synagogue every week of their lives, and then placing his own words directly beside it, as an equal, sometimes as something more. No rabbi spoke that way. Rabbis cited earlier rabbis. Authority was borrowed, passed down through a long chain of respected names, generation after generation. Jesus cites no one but himself. Later in this same sermon, Matthew records that the crowds were astonished, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their scribes. That single sentence explains why the men in the back are so tense. He is not interpreting the law. He is speaking as though he owns it. The first example lands like a blow. You have heard that it was said, you shall not murder. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Stay with me, because this line is easy to hear and hard to feel. Jesus goes further still. He says, whoever calls his brother Raka, an Aramaic term of contempt, something close to worthless or empty-headed, a word meant to strip someone of dignity in a single syllable, will be answerable to the highest Jewish court, the Sanhedrin itself. Murder is an act. Contempt is a posture. And Jesus tells you the posture is already the crime, because the posture is where the murder begins, years before a hand ever moves. He does the same thing with adultery. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart, not the act, the wanting, the private, invisible, unwitnessed wanting. You cannot control what crosses your mind for a moment, and Jesus is not condemning a fleeting thought that arrives and leaves. He is naming what happens when you cultivate it, when you feed it, when you let it become a place you keep returning to. Here's the part nobody tells you. This teaching is not about making an already difficult standard impossible. It is about closing a gap people were quietly exploiting. Divorce law in first-century Judea, as the historian Josephus records in his own account of Jewish customs, allowed a man significant latitude to dismiss his wife for reasons far short of unfaithfulness. A burnt meal, by some interpretations of the debate among the rabbis of the era, was enough grounds for some teachers. Jesus tightens that latitude sharply, protecting the person with the least legal power in the relationship. The wife, who in this culture could not initiate divorce herself and depended entirely on her husband's decision for her future security, her home, and often her survival. Then he turns to oaths, and here the scribes' pens nearly stop moving altogether. Jewish legal culture at the time had developed an elaborate hierarchy of vows. Swearing by the temple carried less weight than swearing by the gold in the temple, and religious teachers argued at length over which oaths were binding and which were technically escapable. It was, in effect, a system built for loopholes, a way to make a promise while quietly leaving yourself an exit. And Jesus deletes the entire system in one sentence. Do not take an oath at all. Let what you say be simply yes or no. You do not need an escape clause if you were never planning to lie. That is the whole teaching, and it is aimed directly at a culture that had turned honesty into a legal negotiation. And then comes the line most people quote without knowing what it originally meant. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. This was never a command to be passive in the face of cruelty. Eye for an eye, in its original context, was a limit on revenge, not a license for it. It existed to stop a wounded man's family from repaying a scratch with a killing, a single tooth with a whole household. Jesus takes a law designed to cap violence and pushes his listeners towards something the law never demanded, refusing to repay violence at all. Picture a Roman soldier standing at the edge of that same crowd, there to watch for unrest rather than to listen for truth. Under Roman occupation, a soldier had the legal right to compel any Jewish civilian to carry his pack for 1 mile, a practice called angaria, and it was a daily, humiliating reminder of who held power in the land. A man could be pulled from his own errands, his own work, his own day, with no warning and no recourse. Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him too. He is not telling you to enjoy the humiliation. He is telling you that a soldier can command your body for 1 mile, but your dignity is not his to take, and the 2nd mile is where you take it back. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That single sentence may be the hardest command in the entire sermon, harder than anything about lust or anger, because it asks you to feel goodwill towards someone who is actively working against you. Not tolerate them, not endure them. Love them, the way a father loves a child who has not yet earned it. Jesus does not leave that command floating in the abstract. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That second half was never actually written in the law of Moses. It had crept in over generations as an unspoken assumption, the kind of tradition that feels like scripture after enough people repeat it. Jesus strips it back out. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Even the weather, Jesus says, refuses to discriminate between the people you approve of and the people you don't. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? That line would have landed hard on the tax collector standing at the back of that crowd. Jesus names his profession specifically, not to shame him, but to say that even the man everyone in that crowd looks down on already manages ordinary reciprocity. Loving people who love you back costs nothing. Loving the person working against you is the only version of love that actually proves anything. And then, at the close of this section, Jesus says something that sounds impossible on its face. You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. The Greek word here is teleos, and it does not carry the weight our modern ear puts on perfect, flawless, error-free, unattainable. Teleos means complete, mature, whole in purpose. Jesus is not demanding sinlessness in a single afternoon. He is describing a target, a life fully aimed at the character of the Father, rather than a life fractured between love for neighbor and contempt for enemy. There's one more thing worth noticing before we move forward. Every single example in this section takes a law meant to restrain the worst of human behavior and turns it into an invitation toward the best of it. Do not merely stop at not murdering. Deal with the anger underneath it. Do not merely stop at not committing adultery. Deal with the wanting underneath it. Do not merely stop at technical honesty. Become a person whose plain word needs no oath behind it. This is the pattern beneath the entire sermon, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now the sermon turns inward, and this is where it gets remarkable, because Jesus starts talking about an audience that is not even present. He describes people who give to the needy, and he says some of them sound a trumpet before they do it. A vivid, almost theatrical image of public almsgiving turned into performance, the ancient equivalent of announcing generosity to a crowd before the coin ever leaves the hand. Whether that was a literal practice or a sharpened figure of speech, the target is unmistakable. Religious giving twisted into a stage for applause. They have received their reward, Jesus says, meaning the applause itself is the entire payment. There is nothing left over from God, because nothing was ever addressed to God in the first place. He says the same about prayer. Do not pray like those who love to stand in synagogues and on street corners to be seen by others. Instead, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then, almost as an aside, he gives you the words themselves. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Read that slowly, because almost every line is doing something specific. It opens not with a request, but with worship. Hallowed be your name. Before a single need is ever mentioned. It asks for daily bread, not surplus, not a storehouse, tying trust in God to today rather than to some hoarded, anxious tomorrow. And it ties forgiveness received to forgiveness given in the very same breath, as if the two cannot be pulled apart from each other. This is not a formula to recite by rote, the way the scribes recited fixed liturgies. It is a pattern for a whole way of approaching God: honest, dependent, unhurried, forgiving. Jesus adds one more image just after this. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and money. The word behind money here is mammon, an Aramaic term for wealth, and Jesus personifies it deliberately. Not as a neutral tool sitting quietly in a purse, but as a rival master competing for the exact same loyalty God asks for. He is not condemning having money. He is naming what happens the moment money starts giving the orders. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet not even Solomon in all his splendor was arrayed like one of these. If God clothes grass that is here today and thrown into the oven tomorrow, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? You have heard this passage recited at funerals and painted on nursery walls, and it is easy to let it become wallpaper. But listen to what it is actually doing. It is not telling you problems will vanish, or that faith is a substitute for planting seed or mending nets. The very farmers and fishermen listening that day would go back to their fields and boats the next morning, regardless of anything said on this hillside. It is asking you to notice that the same God who sustains a sparrow and a wildflower, neither of which lifts a finger to arrange its own future, has not somehow forgotten the people standing in front of him right now, worried about tomorrow's bread. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Not a promise that trouble will stop arriving. A plain acknowledgement that it will, paired with an instruction not to borrow it early. Now the sermon turns toward how you see other people, and here it gets sharp again fast. Judge not, that you be not judged. Not every ancient teacher considered this wisdom. Moral discernment was, and is, necessary for a functioning community, and Jesus himself will go on to tell his listeners to judge false prophets by their fruit within the very same sermon. So this is not a ban on discernment. It is a ban on a specific posture, the habit of magnifying someone else's flaw while quietly ignoring your own. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? The image is almost comic. A man with a plank in his own eye offering to perform delicate surgery on someone else's splinter, and it is meant to be. Ridiculous images are memorable precisely because they are ridiculous, and this one was designed to make an entire Hillside crowd wince and laugh at the same moment. Here's what most people miss about the section that follows. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. 3 verbs, each one more active than the last. Asking is passive, seeking moves your feet, knocking puts your whole hand into it. And Jesus grounds the promise in something every parent in that crowd could feel in their own chest. Which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Then, almost as a summary of everything said so far, Jesus offers a single sentence that generations later would be called the Golden Rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. Not a new law bolted onto the old ones, but a compressed version of everything that came before it. Every teaching about anger, lust, oaths, retaliation, generosity, and judgment folded into one measuring stick you carry with you into every room you enter. Notice, too, what this sentence quietly assumes, that you already know exactly how you want to be treated. You do not need a manual for that part. You already know what mercy feels like when it is shown to you, what contempt feels like when it lands on you, what it costs to be forgiven instead of condemned. Jesus is not teaching you a new fact here. He is asking you to extend outward what you have always understood inward. He follows that with a warning about which road you are actually walking. Not everyone who claims Jesus is genuine either. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. Some, Jesus says, will point to their own impressive spiritual resume on that day. Prophecies given in his name, demons cast out, mighty works performed, and still hear the words, "I never knew you, depart from me." Recognition, it turns out, was never based on performance at all. Not every impressive spiritual performance is trustworthy in the first place. Jesus warns of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, gentle and convincing on the outside, but inwardly are ravenous wolves, and he tells the crowd plainly that a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit, so you will recognize them by what they actually produce over time, not by what they claim about themselves in the moment. And not every path that looks reasonable actually leads somewhere good. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. Picture a well-worn road, comfortable underfoot, crowded with company, requiring no map at all. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. A road that asks something of you, that most people walk right past without noticing it was ever there. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the whole message lands. Jesus describes two builders. One hears these words and does them. He builds his house on rock. Picture the labor that choice costs him. Cutting into stone, hauling it, setting a foundation that takes far longer than a man building on soft, easy sand ever has to wait. His neighbors may have finished their homes and moved in season before he laid his first course of stone. But then the rain falls, the floods come, the winds blow and beat against that house, and it does not fall, because it was founded on rock. The other hears the exact same words and does not do them. He builds his house on sand. Sand is fast. Sand is convenient. Sand lets you move in before the season turns, and for a while, the two houses look identical from the outside. Same walls, same roof, same door. No one walking past either house that first summer could tell you which foundation would hold. The same rain falls on both of them. The same floods rise around both of them. The same winds beat against both of their walls, and the house on sand falls. And great was the fall of it, a fall no one predicted until the very moment it happened. Notice what separates the two men. It is not what they heard. Both men heard the identical sermon, word for word, standing perhaps only a few feet apart on that same hillside. It is what they did with it afterward, alone, when the crowd had gone home, and there was no one left to impress and no applause left to chase. And this is where we go back to the men in the fine robes, standing at the edge of the crowd with their notes. They had heard everything, every beatitude, every "you have heard it" said, but I say to you. Every warning about judging with a plank in your own eye, every image of wolves in sheep's clothing. And for many of them, hearing was as far as it ever went. Throughout the years that followed, the Gospels record repeated attempts by religious leaders to trap Jesus in his own words. A question about paying taxes designed to trick him into treason or blasphemy. Questions about the Sabbath designed to catch him breaking the very law he claimed to fulfill rather than destroy. The listening posture on that hillside did not disappear once the sermon ended and the crowd went home. It followed him for the rest of his ministry, and at his trial, witnesses would come forward twisting his own sayings to build a case against him. Men who had spent years listening for exactly the wrong reason, sharpening the very words meant to save them into a weapon meant to condemn him instead. The same words that could build a house on rock were, for some of the very people who first heard them, turned into material for the case against the man who spoke them. That is not a comfortable ending, and it is not supposed to be, because you were on that hillside too, in a sense, the moment you pressed play on this video. You have now heard the same sermon the crowd heard by the Sea of Galilee. The Beatitudes, the anger beneath the murder, the wanting beneath the adultery, the plank in your own eye, the narrow gate, the house on the rock. The question the sermon leaves you with is not whether you understood it. Understanding was never really in question. Plenty of people who heard Jesus that day understood him perfectly well, and understanding did absolutely nothing for them at all. The question is what kind of ground you are building on. 3 things are worth carrying with you when this video ends. First, blessing, in the language of this sermon, does not belong only to the strong, the comfortable, or the impressive. It reaches for the poor in spirit, the mourning, the meek, which means it can reach you exactly where you are standing right now, not where you wish you were standing instead. You do not need to fix yourself into a more presentable version of your life before this sermon has anything to say to you. It was written for the version of you that exists today. Second, the deepest problems this sermon addresses are never only about actions. Anger before murder, wanting before adultery, performance before generosity. Jesus keeps pointing past the visible act and toward the invisible root, because that is where real change actually has to start, not on the surface where everyone else can see it. It is far easier to control what your hands do than what your heart wants, and Jesus was never interested in the easier project. Third, and this is the one worth sitting with the longest, hearing these words changes nothing on its own. Two men heard the identical sermon on that hillside, one built on rock, one built on sand. The wind and the rain did not ask either of them what they believed, and it did not care how well either man could quote what Jesus had said that day. It only revealed what they had already built, long before the storm ever arrived, back when no one else was watching and the choice still felt like it cost nothing. So here is the only question this sermon was ever really asking: when the storm comes for you, and it will come, the way it comes for every house eventually, what is your house standing on? Somewhere on that hillside, the crowd is finally beginning to disperse. Peter is walking back down toward the boats, quiet, turning the sermon over in his mind the way you might turn over a stone that turned out to be heavier than it looked. The mother is gathering her children. The tax collector slips away before anyone can get a clear look at his face. And the men in the fine robes fold whatever notes they have taken and walk back toward the town, already discussing among themselves what they have just heard. Not with wonder, but with calculation. Two groups walked down that hill that day, carrying the exact same words. One group would spend years building something on them. The other would spend years trying to tear the speaker down. The words did not change between the two groups. Only what each one did with them afterward did. If these words have reached something in you today, that is worth paying attention to. And if you want to keep walking through the words of Jesus, one honest explanation at a time, stay close, because there is more of this story